Hello and welcome to another episode of Brentcast Movie and TV Talk. I am so excited right now because I finally have got to see Spider-Man No Way Home, and I am super excited to be talking about it right now. There will be spoilers, but this movie has been out since Christmas, and I'm pretty sure that everyone that wanted to see it has already seen it. So let's move into it. No Way Home picks up right where Far From Home leaves off, with Mysterio revealing the identity of Spider-Man as Peter Parker, along with a photo of Peter. Peter then freaks out, grabs MJ, and swings away. While he is, people are noticing him, and news helicopters are following him, and do so all the way back to the apartment. The entire world, knowing that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, is the reason that this whole movie happens. Things get bad though, with people throwing bricks at the apartment windows and all that. The whole situation that Mysterio created is not only affecting Peter, but also MJ and Ned, since they are the two closest friends to Spider-Man. It affects their lives in the manner that Ned and MJ can't even get into MIT because of recent events surrounding Spider-Man and Mysterio. So what does Peter decide to do? Well, he gets the bright idea to visit an old Avengers friend, Doctor Strange. Peter first asks Strange if he can turn back time so people will not know who Peter Parker is. Strange obviously can't do that because he doesn't have the Time Stone anymore. However, Strange tells Peter about a spell that he can perform that will make everyone forget who Peter Parker is. So Peter and Strange go to do the spell. Once Strange starts casting it, Peter realizes he wants to change some things. Basically wants it so that only Aunt May, Ned, MJ, and Happy Hogan and the rest of the Avengers know that he's Peter Parker, but no one else does. But Peter doesn't tell him this before he started casting the spell, but rather during the spell. And this causes the spell to go out of control and makes it so that Strange has to contain the spell so things don't go to hell. Sadly, things still didn't go great with said spell. So after Strange contains the spell, he's telling Peter how sorry he is that Peter's friends can't get into MIT, even after the rejection letters and additional pleading, and Peter is just kind of like, wait, I could have called MIT and pleaded my case with them to let MJ and Ned in, since Peter doesn't feel like he deserves it. And like, Strange is just like, wait, you're telling me you didn't even call them? And Strange kicks him out of the sanctorum, and Peter calls Flash, who is at a party for people getting into MIT. For a favor, Flash tells Peter that an important MIT person is driving to the airport. Peter swings in and finds said person and basically tries to make his case with them while standing on the side of a busy highway. This, however, is interrupted with the introduction of Doc Ock, the one from 2004's Spider-Man 2. Having watched all three of the original Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies recently, I was thrilled to see how they were going to introduce Doc Ock into No Way Home. The two fight, and Doc Ock realizes that Peter isn't the same Peter from his universe. Things get even more fun when No Way Home introduces Green Goblin from 2002's Spider-Man. We get a little bit of fighting before Doctor Strange portals Peter back to the Sanctorum. Strange then explains to Peter that despite containing the spell, that the spell ended up going for people who know who Peter Parker is and brought them into the current MCU universe. They're also talking in a room that has like containment cells, one now with Doc Ock and one with the Curtis Connors, aka Lizard Guy, from 2012's The Amazing Spider-Man. Strange tells Peter that he has to go after all the multiverse trespassers, and adds a thing to Peter's integrated Spider-Man suit that allows him to shoot the person and it teleports them back to the containment cell. It's magic, you know? Peter convinces Strange that he needs help doing this, so Ned and MJ are brought in to help Peter track his people down. They scour the internet and get a lead on a guy who they assume is going to be Green Goblin. The mission is at night, and the thing I find a little odd here is that Peter goes from using the Iron Spider 2.0 suit during the highway fight to a black and gold suit for this at night mission. I'm really not the biggest fan of this one, mostly because of the gold. I wish it was like black and silver or something. I did a bit of research and it turns out that the black and gold suit is just the inside out form of the red and black suit from the end of Far From Home, so that's interesting that his suit is reversible. Anyway, it turns out that the person they were going after is not the Green Goblin, but rather it's Electro from 2014's The Amazing Spider-Man 2. I mean, it's the same actor, but this time they didn't make him blue like they did in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. The two fight and suddenly a wall of sand forms around Peter, and this is how they introduce Sandman from 2007's Spider-Man 3, who assumes that this is the Peter from his universe, which Peter tells him he's a different Peter, but that he's able to get Sandman to help him take down Electro. Peter uses the magic thing on Electro and sends him back to a containment cell. This scares Sandman a bit, who gets kind of upset, but then Peter does the same thing to Sandman. I'm sure that you're all wondering, what happened to Green Goblin? Well, we go to him. We go to Norman, basically having an argument with the Goblin side of himself, and then smashes the Goblin helmet and walks off. Peter then gets a call from May, who tells him that one of the people he's after walked into the homeless shelter that she's volunteering at. Peter books it to find May sitting there with Norman Osborn, who tries to explain the whole mental instability from the Goblin side of himself, but neither Peter nor May really know what he's talking about. Peter takes Norman back to the Sanctorum, since he's the last person they needed. Strange arrives with a box with the thing that formed when he contained the spell, while explaining to Peter that he's going to do it again and send all these villains back to their respective universes. Peter doesn't really want this to happen though, because if they go back, they are all going to die because they all die fighting Spider-Man in their universes. There's a pretty decent fight that ensues between Peter and Strange over control of the magic box thing. Ultimately, Peter is actually able to trap Strange in the mirror dimension. He gets back to the lair with MJ and Ned, and they decide to make a plan to fix all of these villains before they send them back. Peter takes all of them back to the safe house that he, May, and Happy have been living in. Peter has a Stark Tech thing called a Fabricator that's able to make anything, which is great. He starts by making another inhibitor chip for Doc Ock, so Doc Ock can be in control of the mechanical arms instead of them controlling him. This goes really well, and Doc Ock becomes a good guy. Next up is making something that will fix Norman, but also making a device to fix Electro. This is when everything goes to shit, and Goblin takes over Norman's mind. Green Goblin starts to fight with Peter. Electro takes the arc reactor that was powering the Stark thing, and then escapes with Sandman and Doc Ock. Just kind of goes away. Oh yeah, Connors, he stayed in the truck while everyone was in the apartment, but then escapes once everyone else does. This is also when the greatest tragedy of the movie happens, and I'm gonna spoil it right now. Are you ready? May dies. Right after saying the classic line, "With great power comes great responsibility." Back at the Sanctum, Ned and MJ are waiting for Peter to return. MJ says she's going to activate the magic box thing, but she doesn't. Oh, I forgot to mention that when they trapped Strange in the mirror dimension, Ned took his sling ring. So while Ned and MJ are talking, Ned says something about wanting to see Peter again and almost opens a portal. MJ tells him to do it again until he fully opens a portal after saying that he wants to see Spider-Man again, or Peter again. This is when the movie introduces Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man from the two Amazing Spider-Man movies. There's a bit of a comedic scene of trying to establish that this is Peter. Then Ned and MJ try to use the sling ring again to find their Peter. This time, they still don't find their Peter, but they get Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker. To find MCU Peter, Andrew's Peter and Tobey's Peter ask Ned and MJ if MCU Peter has a special place that he goes to get away from it all. I'm just gonna say, from here on out in the discussion, I'm going to be referring to MCU Peter as Peter 1, Andrew Garfield's Peter as Peter 2, and Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker as Peter 3. So, we go to Peter 1, who is on the roof of the high school. Ned and MJ hug him since, he just lost May. Ned and MJ then introduce Peter 1 to Peter 2 and Peter 3. The two Peters share with Peter 1 about the people that they've lost and how hard it has been on them and how they wanted revenge, but even that doesn't make them feel better in the case of Peter 3. So Peter 1 tells Peter 2 and Peter 3 about his plan, and they want to help him. We get to see all three Peters doing some science stuff and making things that will fix the remaining villains, along with making the plan to lure said villains to them so they'll be able to administer said fixes. The final fight takes place on the Statue of Liberty. The short of it is this: Sandman gets fixed first, then Connors gets fixed next, and Electro gets fixed third with the assistance of Doc Ock, who's a good guy still. However, this does not all go well, as Green Goblin comes back in. Peter 1 deals with the glider pretty quickly, and now becomes a hand-to-hand fight between Peter 1 and Green Goblin, and at this point, Peter 1 is extremely pissed off at Green Goblin because he is the one that killed May. Peter 1 gets Goblin in a good position to kill him. Peter 1 picks up the glider and is going to stab Goblin until Peter 3 grabs the glider in an attempt to stop Peter 1 from killing Goblin. But Goblin takes the opportunity to stab Peter 3 right as Peter 2 tosses Goblin's fix to Peter 1, and Peter 1 uses the fix to fix Green Goblin. Now, during all of this fighting, Strange gets brought out of the mirror dimension by Ned with the sling ring. He's impressed that Peter 1's plan is working, and stays out of the fight for the most part. After the fight, Peter 1 basically tells Strange to do the spell again, and just make it so everyone will forget who Peter Parker is, like he's never existed. Peter 1 first says goodbye to Peter 2 and Peter 3. Then Peter 1 goes and tells Ned and MJ what's going on, and they all get sad that they won't know who Peter Parker is, but Peter 1 has no other choice. The spell happens and it works. All the villains go back to their universes, as well as Peter 2 and Peter 3. Peter 1 then goes to the coffee shop that MJ works at, and Ned is also there too. Peter 1 is about to say a bunch of stuff to make MJ and Ned remember who he is, but Peter 1 decides not to, for some reason. I'm not really sure why he doesn't, but maybe it's one of those, knowing Spider-Man puts Ned and MJ in danger, so Peter 1 thinks it's better that they don't know who he is. Anyway, Peter 1 then visits May's grave, and Happy Hogan also shows up. They both say they know May through Spider-Man, and yeah, the spell worked, and it's all good. That's basically the end of the important parts of the movie. The first end credit scene has Eddie Brock from the Venom movie in a bar in Mexico. The bartender is telling him about how this universe has a lot of superheroes and tells Eddie about Thanos. The scene ends with Eddie getting sent back to his universe, but OMG, a tiny bit of symbiote gets left in the current MCU. What does this mean? Nothing at all. The other end credit scene is a literal trailer for the Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness movie. Not that interested in that movie. But wait, I'm still not done. So aside from the other two live-action Spider-Men being in this movie, there's also one appearance from another Marvel character. Early in the movie, the Department of Damage Control shows up and takes Peter 1, May, Ned, MJ, and Happy Hogan in to be questioned. When they get back to the apartment, all of them are talking to a lawyer named Matthew Murdock. Yeah, they used Matthew Murdock, the one from the Netflix Daredevil show. I was really not expecting this, because I get the feeling that Marvel just kind of ignores their Netflix shows, which is why Luke Cage, Punisher, Jessica Jones, and Iron Fist have never made any appearance in the MCU movies. Now, one thing I want to say about this movie that could be negative, since I have very little negative to say on this movie. Most of the movie, Peter 1 is in what I'm calling the 2.0 version of the Iron Spider suit, which in terms of like how they actually film it for the movie, it's done with motion capture, and then of course they use CGI to make the suit look and sound like it's metal. But for whatever reason though, there were some shots in this movie where the Iron Spider 2.0 suit didn't look or sound metallic and oftentimes just looked like beat up leather. I don't know if it's just me, but that's what it looked like at times. The last thing I have here is questions, because this movie raises some major questions, mostly about Peter 2 and Peter 3. Like, I want to know how the universes of Peter 2 and Peter 3 are going to be different now that all of their villains are fixed and aren't really villains. I want to know, like, are these villains going to go back to their universe, but now it's a timeline in which they never became a villain and fought Spider-Man, etc.? Did they go back to the exact moment they were taken from their universes? I just have a lot of questions about the universes of Peter 2 and Peter 3 that we'll probably never get answers to, but I just want to know. So yeah, this is finally the end of my discussion for Spider-Man No Way Home. This is by far my favorite Spider-Man movie, basically ever. Spider-Man No Way Home. Oh wait. It's funny, it's got good action, and so many references to past Spider-Man movies that I just love to see this all in one Spider-Man movie. Spider-Man No Way Home is a great movie and extremely enjoyable, and I highly recommend it. That's all I have to say, so if you add to the conversation, leave a comment below. As always, thanks for listening, and goodbye.